What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Short Shift Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Burnett, and joining me, as always, your other host, the talented Mr. E, Louis Ezekiel. Louis, my pal, my friend, how are you this fine Tuesday evening?
Doing very well, thank you. Really excited to get into the show. We had a little blast of winter weather, but things are starting to look improving. We should be in the 60s Fahrenheit coming up, I think, starting tomorrow. So really excited for that spring weather to come in.
Well, it sounds like spring season where you are, and Louis, I can tell you that it's also become trade season in the NHL, and I feel like, the people, they want to know, they're tuning into a Tuesday episode of Short Shifts because they want to know about the big trades in the NHL and whether Josh Manson or Nico Sturm or the other player who was traded, whose name is Tyson Jost, traded to Minnesota. Are any of these players now fantasy relevant, off the waiver wire and into our roster? Is that what we're thinking with any of these players?
All right, well, we'll move through these pretty quickly, I think. Josh Manson in Colorado is going to be buried behind the enormous embarrassment of riches that Colorado has along that blue line. I don't think he was fantasy relevant before, certainly not fantasy relevant now. As far as the Jost and Sturm trade, it makes sense, I think, for both teams. Jost was stuck in the bottom six kind of as a grinder and a penalty killer. Sturm can do the same thing, but for a lower cap hit. Maybe an opportunity for Jost to get some middle six time as opposed to some bottom six time, but I'd have to imagine he's going to start on the third line at best. So no, I don't think there's a ton of relevance here, but at least, we've got a couple dominoes falling here early. We might, lead us to some more interesting moves later on in the week.
Yeah, I may have unfortunately tipped my hand that I'm also disinterested in these players based on the situation. Louis, I know though that there is another defenseman who is supposedly on the trade block that you've had maybe is a bit more fantasy relevant. People might have questions about.
Sure. Well, definitely someone who appears to be, at least they're trying to avoid a repeat of the Chychrun situation. Obviously, he was injured for 2 to 4 weeks when many people expected that he would be traded shortly. The Habs are holding Ben Chiarot out of the lineup ahead of the trade deadline. So it certainly seems like there's some interest and a move may be imminent. He's actually been on a nice hot streak lately, considering that he only gets secondary deployment. He's got 9 points in his last 9 games, including a 2-goal, 1-assist outing. And he's playing big minutes, at least 23 minutes a night over that span of 9 games, putting up decent hit and block numbers. The scoring obviously has a bonus for anyone holding on to him for peripherals. It's tough to lose him for injury precaution, I suppose, but, he's certainly unlikely to have his ceiling raised by a move to a contender. So I would say don't spend a bunch of time waiting around. Tonight's a busy night, so hopefully you were able to fill that slot on the roster if you have Ben Chiarot, but I wouldn't be opposed at all. The 18% of Yahoo GMs who have him, I think it might be best just to thank him for his service and let him go until his future is clear. But, best case scenario, I think he's back into a secondary situation and, maybe not even getting those kind of minutes that he was getting for Montreal. So as exciting as his nice little run has been, I imagine that being held out and then potentially being traded, I think that probably, gums up the works a little bit for this hot streak that he's been on. Could be a useful perfs guy, but there's always excitement when players are traded and they see little bumps in their ownership, but I don't think that's a guy that you especially need to get excited for, despite the fact that he was on a nice little run.
Yeah, Ben Chiarot, a guy who I've rostered in some very deep leagues, but otherwise I think is pretty unexciting, and probably, going to wind up in that bottom pair role on a better team than Montreal. Louis, we have a potential outjury coming up. I guess it's not quite ready to return, but Drake Batherson told the media today he expects to be back in the Sens lineup by March 26th, late next week. Batherson has 34 points through 31 games this season and is just 60% rostered, which now that he has announced he's expecting to return to the lineup, within a week, that number should climb quickly. In Batherson's place, Connor Brown has been hanging out on the top line with Brady Tkachuk and Josh Norris and has been pretty hot in the last 4 games, 4 points. Sens have a good rest of week schedule, so I don't mind holding on to Connor Brown for a little bit longer or adding him off the waiver wire if you're looking for a plug and play waiver wire option on the wing. But I think the big news here is definitely the soon to be returned, hopefully, fingers crossed, Drake Batherson.
Yeah, Josh Norris has been really nice since getting back from his injury, and to add Batherson back on with his 90-point pace, I think would be really exciting for anybody holding players on the top line or top power play in Ottawa. They've certainly shown some of that late season scoring acumen that we see sometimes with these, teams like Ottawa and like Arizona, who of course were our teams that played during yesterday's only game of the night. So yeah, I think it's just interesting to see these opportunities out there. Very exciting, definitely, for those folks who lost Batherson to be able to get him back. If you had managers who got impatient and let him go, if you have the extra moves, if you have the open IR slot, could be a total steal for you to grab Batherson right now and pop him into your injured reserve, or if you're certain of your playoff spot, even if you don't have available injured space, just keep him in your lineup because he was just playing outstanding before this big injury and could be a difference maker for you heading into the fantasy playoffs.
All right, Lewis, why don't you take us over to Vancouver where we have a injury to chat about?
Sure. So we have not seen much of Elias Pettersson lately. He's been day-to-day for a while. Boudreau says it's not a long-term thing, but he is going to be out at least for tonight's game, it seems. So in Pettersson's absence, we've seen a top 6 of Pearson, Miller, Garland, and Höglander, Horvat, Besser. Luckily, I think there's enough depth in Vancouver to make up for Pettersson's absence, and he's, run hot and cold, certainly has been better of late for his owners. But I don't think it makes a whole, those are players who generally should be widely owned. I guess it's a nice opportunity for Höglander next to Horvat and Besser, but not kind of a seismic change for anybody up in the Canucks lineup. But one change of significance, not at even strength, but on the power play, is that Oliver Ekman-Larsson has grabbed a slot there. So that could be, a potentially interesting grab. But again, he's day-to-day. He's been day-to-day for a little bit. So it's tough to say. His return could be imminent, and that OEL slot could be gone by the time that Vancouver plays their next game. So, just keep your eye on at game day lines, and hopefully that will help us figure out who's going to be on that top power play moving forward. One other interesting player who has returned to the lineup and has gotten a nice deployment. Ben, tell us a little bit about our guy, Joe Thornton in Florida.
Our guy, Joe Thornton. I don't know if I'm ready to get that intense with my love for Jumbo Joe. I feel like, unfortunately, times have changed a little bit, but hey, it is nice to see Joe Thornton back in the lineup in Florida. Good to, hey, maybe he'll score 4 goals and we'll get a show after the game. But interesting to see him pop right up onto the top line now that he's back from injury, playing with Sasha Barkov and Carter Verhaeghe. That means Anthony Duclair is down to line 3, while Huberdeau and Bennett are joined by Sam Reinhart on the second line. Duclair playing with Eetu Listerainen and Mason Marchment. Definitely a bit of a bummer here for Duclair rosterers who have been holding him because he's top line, top power play. I know he's been fairly hot lately, so probably not an insta drop. And maybe it is just more of a benefit for Marchment, but it's definitely not as good as seeing him up playing with Barkov at even strength and on the power play everywhere. As for Thornton, I struggle to see getting too excited about rostering him, but I guess he makes for a pretty interesting stream anytime you could grab a Panthers game on an off night or something, just because, I mean, if you're getting somebody with top line exposure to Barkov any night of the week, you'll probably have a better chance than not to grab a point.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of shuffling with these lines. I unless we see some real fireworks, I sort of don't see this necessarily staying for very long. I could see it being a 2-game, audition. And if things don't really turn out as terms of production there, we could see it disappear. So I wouldn't get too attached to this idea. It's interesting while it's there. We'll see how the results turn out in the near future. But yeah, I wouldn't be rushing out to grab him necessarily until, we see for sure that he's going to be there for the next game, since obviously this is not going to be something that can help you on Tuesday.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not rushing out, but keep those eyes on game day line tweets and see if you can't find I agree with you. It's definitely an opportunistic situation. If it happens to work out, there are worse bets off the waiver wire. Lewis, we have one more headline we wanted to talk about, and that's over in Toronto. What can you tell us about the ever enjoyable goaltending situation for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
So the good news out of the Toronto Gold Crease is coming to us via one Erik Källgren with a K, like our guy Shillington. Thank you to our patient patrons who explained that pronunciation for us. Appreciate that. He is in the late stages here of putting together what looks to be a quality start for the Toronto Maple Leafs in goal. They currently lead Dallas 4-0 with about a minute remaining to play. I imagine we are going to see a bit of a rush to go and grab this guy if he's not already taken, if somebody didn't already take the plunge. Just a pretty impressive showing against a team with some real offensive mettle in Dallas. Just the confidence I think that Toronto can take from not feeling like they constantly need to be moving back to protect their goalie because, they're going to be sliding across the ice in embarrassing replays when goals get scored on them. I imagine he will take on the next start as well. He has the potential to seize the majority of the starts from Peter Mrazek, who has just had a very rough outing in his attempt to sort of fill in for Jack Campbell, to spell him first and then to cover for him while he's injured for the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's an interesting opportunity. I think if you were somebody who gave Mrazek a shot because Campbell was injured, you could do a lot worse than Enes Källgren, as we call him on the show.
That's right. Our good boy Ennis. Just really exciting, I think, I'm very happy for our Toronto listeners who are getting to see something. And that game has just gone final. So congratulations, Erik Källgren, for getting a shutout over Dallas in your first NHL start. How cool.
All right, Lewis, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have a couple of Stanley Cup winning captains on our streak section, as well as a player I've referred to as Diet Brady Tkachuk earlier this year. You're listening to Short Shifts. Welcome back to Short Shifts. Lewis, we are barreling into the streak section of our show, and I wanted to talk about Johnny Toews over in Chicago, a player who I drafted in a lot of places. I've regretted drafting in every single place where I grabbed him, and he is finally starting to turn it on a little bit with 5 points over his last 5 games played after returning from a concussion that kept him out of the lineup for several weeks. Funnily enough, this turnaround for Toews comes after being shifted off the top power play and decidedly into the middle six. I suppose that part isn't as big of a change for Toews over the past couple years, but certainly he's always been somebody who's been on Chicago's top power play unit. He's been supplanted, though, by Dylan Strome and Brandon Hagel, who I'm mentioning because we are contractually obligated to do so. So this isn't the Toews deployment of old, and despite this hot streak, he's on pace for just 42 points this season. He's also scored 3 goals over this stretch on just 6 shots. So not somebody who I think anybody, like if you're looking even on the surface level of shooting percentage, just not really pulling it together in a way that makes me have hope for him longer term. Certainly, it's good to see a bit of a turnaround for Toews, but overall, I remain skeptical that this is something we can expect to continue.
Yeah, I'm there with you as well. We used to think of him as a very, predictable 65 to 70 point guy, and I think those days have passed him by. I think until he takes back that prime deployment that he has enjoyed at times in the past, yeah, I think I would be fairly leery of Toews moving forward, despite his nice little hot run here.
All right, Lewis, why don't you tell us about our next hot streak tonight?
All right, the next guy up on our discussion is, they call him Lawson Crouse, but I call him Awesome Crouse. Despite a demotion to the fourth line to try to keep the tanking on, Crouse came through again on Tuesday with another goal, and I believe he may have managed an assist as well. Just 4 goals on his last 6 shots as of the time I recorded this information to record. And, we saw another 6 goals so far from Arizona. They are just really pouring it on lately. Again, Montreal caveats apply. Sam Montembeault was nothing to write home about here on Tuesday evening. But, I think a very interesting situation. I don't love that demotion that he got. I would definitely check out, maybe use Frozen Tools to sort of see what the line combinations that were used by Arizona here on Tuesday before I get too excited and run out to grab him. Obviously, Keller and Schmaltz are the most interesting folks to run out and grab. Probably grabbed already, and certainly we've been talking about them for the better part of a week here. We actually talked about Schmaltz very early in his hot run, I think 2 weeks ago. And so obviously anybody who ran out and grabbed him, I'm kicking myself. I wish I had done the same. If I had followed my own advice, I'd be a happy camper right now. But, just really cool to see Lawson Crouse go out there. He had 60% of a Lemieux trick, because I think it was an 88 or 89. Mario Lemieux scored on the power play, at even strength and shorthanded, which is the feat that, Crouse achieved, but he also got one on a penalty shot, and he got one in the empty net as well. But I think for a guy named Lawson Crouse, who I'm sure was on no rosters to start the season, 60% of Mario Lemieux, I think is the kind of thing that anyone should aspire to.
I mean, the one thing about Arizona that you can talk a lot of crap, but Lawson Crouse being on the fourth line is, to me, very different from being on the fourth line on most other teams. Because, on this line, he's playing with Christian Fischer, who is, a mid-6 guy, I think you could say. Not somebody you're grabbing their wingmates because they're playing with Christian Fischer, but certainly an NHLer. And then on the other side, you've got Matthias Michelli, a player whose name I am just saying now for the first time and probably butchering. So, yeah, not exciting, but I mean, I wouldn't look at any of the other lines, including the one where Phil Kessel is playing, and say that that's clearly a better line. And in fact, the Lawson Crouse line was the second highest ice time among the 3 or the 4 lines for Arizona on Monday. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're underselling him a little bit by describing him as a fourth liner. I'd say that he has clearly become a guy who's going to get a fair amount of ice time from the middle 6, and he hits like a mofo, Lewis. So I like Lawson Crouse just fine. Somebody who I wouldn't consider him a fourth liner.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Certainly with the amount of blending that we see, and then, we can talk about where the lines sort of fall in their pecking order. But, it's the productive line right now, the second most productive line after the Keller and Schmaltz line. So, yeah, I think it's legit to call him a second liner and not worry so much maybe about who he's being deployed with. So, yeah, very nice. Good on you, Lawson Crouse. All right, Ben, we've got one more, as you said, Stanley Cup winning center to talk about here. Let's head over to LA, which we've talked about quite a lot recently, and we've got one more cold streak up in the top line.
We sure do, Lewis. And this is a player who I think every year starts the season quite hot over the past few years, but this year was on another level through the first 5-10 games of the season. That's Anze Kopitar, of course, who is now pointless in his last 5 and down to what I would say a still nice 69-point pace on the year. But if you look back over his last 41 games, Kopitar has only paced for 60 points over that stretch after starting the season with 21 points through his first 20 games played. So we've talked about a few Kings that have gone cold the past few weeks. It does feel like the whole team is struggling right now. But one thing that is really solid to see with Kopitar, and actually, in fairness, there are a few things. You know, as he gets older, we see a lot of players. We talked about Nick Backstrom recently as one of them, who start to see downticks in ice time. And Jonathan Toews is a player who, again, like into his mid-30s at this point, also seeing that downtick. Anze Kopitar, 34 years old, still playing 21 minutes a night, 61 games through the season. So absolutely still being leaned on as a bit of a workhorse in LA. Not only that, Kopitar's shots per game are the best he's put up in the last 11 years, which is just absolutely amazing to see. They've stayed high the past few months. It's the only issue for Kopitar is that his personal shooting percentage has tanked. So I would say better days ahead for Kopitar, obviously better than the 0-5 that he's currently riding. But I think just in general, like this is a guy who we should at least be expecting 70 points or so. And I feel like Brian brought this up a few weeks ago on the Mega Show as well, when Kopitar was having a bit more of a mini struggle. I think that 70 points or so for Kopitar seems reasonable. Might be worth grabbing if you're in a shallower league and he's at the waiver wire, because I do think that he could be useful through the playoff run. If you are a playoff bound team that was kicking yourself for not having traded Kopitar at your trade deadline, thinking that maybe the streak was here to stick, maybe that could give you a little bit of solace as well. But yeah, Anze Kopitar, I see better days ahead.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's, you know, he is, you know, such a great fantasy player, and you want to see these careers go on where they're relevant for as long as possible. I love your note about his shooting. We were talking about some of the kind of players that Elon likes, and I joked that shots are Elon's love language. And I really think that, if you keep shooting, and if he keeps shooting and these shot rates continue the way they are and he keeps getting leaned on for these heavy minutes, we're going to see this cold streak come to an end just by regressing to the mean a little bit for our guy, Anze Kopitar.
All right, Lewis, that is all the time that we have for tonight's episode. For myself, Ben Burnett, thank you all so much for listening. And Lewis, thanks so much for hanging out with me, buddy.
Always a pleasure. Love to do it. Thanks so much for having us, everybody who is inviting us into their earbuds. We really appreciate it. Please give us a follow at Short Shifts KK. You can follow Brian and Elon at Keeping Carlson, Dave Betton of the Stream Scheme at NHL Stream Scheme. Great episode this week. If you haven't listened yet, please make sure you download that. This is, a week with very busy on days, so that streaming becomes so important. Definitely recommend you follow at Game Day Lines, at Game Day Goalies, and at Game Day News. Visit the great sites where we research our episodes at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach. And until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.